On Joe Rogan, Jordan B. Peterson offers an insightful defense of the blue-haired crowd. They're creatives, okay?
They're the same people that were doing tattooing and piercing, and they often are literally the same people because they have piercings. It's like, well, they have mutable identities. They're not stable in their identities. They're creative. Creative people, by definition, aren't stable in their identities. That's what makes them creative. Now, the downside of that is creativity is a high-risk, high-return strategy. Your new idea is probably stupid and wrong, and maybe it's fatal. But now and then, it's unbelievably successful. And also, now and then, our culture would die without it. So we always have this problem because we have to maintain stability because otherwise everything degenerates into chaos. But mere stability won't work because the future's different from the past. Like technically different in a non-deterministic way. It's actually different. And so then we have to figure out, well, how do we modify our memories or our traditions at a rate that enables us to keep up with the culture? And the answer to this is, in part, we let creative people play multiple games on the fringe, and some of them are radically successful, and then we copy them.
So you think that a lot of what's going on with people that want to change their gender identity is creativity?
No, I don't think so.
So what do you...
I know so.
You know so.
Yeah, but that's not all of it, but that's definitely part of it.
But there are...
What? At first, what he was saying is like people on the fringes, like the creative fringes, kind of motivate culture and shift culture. There is some truth to that, obviously. But then turning that back to trans people somehow, and like trans people's existence actually is about their creativity is pretty funny. I mean, I don't know how the fuck he came up with like, there's some creative trans people out there, but definitely not all trans people are fucking creative. What kind of fucking take is this? Half the trans people in my chat, all they know is fucking eat hot chip and play that weird strategy game, okay? Even in a weird way, it's like, what's it fucking called? No, not Wordle. Yeah, Hearts of Iron 4, okay? That is what I'm talking about. Trans people love playing Hearts of Iron 4. The fucking Excel spreadsheet game, dude. Shitting on trans people. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Doesn't mean that, you know, there are very creative trans people, but that doesn't mean that like trans people are creative inherently, and that like, you know, their gender is a part of their creative project or is a manifestation of their creativity. You just made a tasteful trans joke. They're just mad they can't call them slurs and question their humanity. Yeah, I mean, even there, JBP literally said trans people's like identity and their transness, their existence is an art project. Like it's just a way to fucking, again, further devalue, delegitimize trans existence.
When someone is so attracted to the idea that they were born in the wrong body, it means so much. They're so compelled that they're willing to go through surgery to change.
God, it means all sorts of things. I knew a kid in Toronto who was on the autistic spectrum, and a lot of the people who are manifesting serious issues with gender identity are on the autistic spectrum.
Oh my God. Yo! Does Jordan Peterson exclusively hang out on Twitch or something? What the fuck is he saying, dude? Jesus Christ. Bro, isn't he literally like a fucking... What the fuck? He said... Bro, if he wasn't who he was, this would be pretty funny, okay? Like, if he wasn't such a gigantic fucking transphobe... I feel like I'm watching a trans comedian, okay? Or like a trans Twitch streamer joke about trans people, okay? Did I say artistic? I meant autistic. Yeah, no, he first said artistic, and now he's saying autistic.
This is like Abigail Schreier's work and rapid onset gender dysphoria amongst women.
Yeah, well, that's a different thing, the rapid onset. That's more like... So part of the reason I objected to Bill C-SOX 16 to begin with was because I knew full well as a clinician that as soon as we messed with fundamental sex categories and changed the terminology, we would fatally confuse thousands of young girls. I knew that because I knew the literature on psychological contagion, and it stretches back like 500 years, that literature, 300 years. It's all outlined in a book by Henri Ellenberger called History of Psychoanalytic Ideas. It doesn't matter. It's Henri Ellenberger, and it's his main work if you want to look it up. And so psychological contagions are very common. And so one of them, for example, was the satanic ritual abuse accusations that emerged in daycares in the 1980s. And that was a consequence of women going into the workforce en masse, leaving their children with strangers and starting to have pathological fantasies about it, especially if they were borderline schizophrenic. And those...
What? Wait, what the fuck?
ideas. It doesn't matter. It's Henri Alain Berger, and it's his main work if you want to look it up. And so psychological contagions are very common. And so one of them, for example,
I mean, he's right about psychological contagion, okay? And he's right about the satanic panic, a well-documented phenomena. Love that he literally still placed that on women, dude. That's awesome. And not only women, but women in the workplace, dude. What the fuck?
was the satanic ritual abuse accusations that emerged in daycares in the 1980s. And that was a consequence of women going into the workforce en masse, leaving their children with strangers and starting to have pathological fantasies about it, especially if they were borderline schizophrenic. And those fantasies propagated into the population.
That's awesome. Do you think JP realizes he's playing into the trans panic? I don't think he cares. I don't think he gives a shit. Like, do you think JP thinks, does JP know that he's just saying some crazy shit right now about the satanic panic? Does it matter? No. I usually agree with you, but I feel like right now you're interpreting everything he says in the worst way possible. Probably because you like Jordan Peterson. And he has a very good way of making it seem as though he has a totally reasonable and not like an incredibly fucking reactionary point of view, especially when it comes to trans issues. Jordan Peterson is transphobic. If you don't recognize that Jordan Peterson is transphobic, then you might be transphobic yourself. I've done numerous videos on the subject. I've written extensively on the subject. Jordan Peterson has been always and will continue to be always trans motherfucking phobic. He's also talking about C16, which is well documented. C16 has led to 0 fucking arrests. C16 is quite literally the reason, or Jordan Peterson's interpretation or bastardization rather of the bill C16, which was simply just an expansion of hate speech laws that already existed in most other places. It was just federalizing it. That in and of itself, that led to so much transphobia and so many people being misinformed that the Canadian Bar Association had to come out with an actual fucking letter informing people that Jordan Peterson specifically is wrong. So for him to turn around and try to justify it many years later after that, I love the double whammy there of like not only Jordan Peterson engaging in obviously fucking transphobic rhetoric by saying, you know, trans people are simply just like acting out this artistic creative desire that they have and that they actually have like some kind of mental illness, and then comparing it to, again, an incredibly misogynistic attitude of the satanic panic was exclusively caused by women in the workplace. Like, how the fuck did he do that? In a sequence of 1 minute and like 47 seconds, he literally said trans people are crazy, okay, their gender stuff is just crazy, it's madness, and I'm worried that like they're gonna spread their crazy to other young women, you know, just like the satanic panic, which was caused by women in the workplace.
And who's more interested in people than thinks. That's why I'm a psychologist. You know, I actually have a relatively...
Oh my God, did he go on Joe Rogan to fucking just be transphobic for like 4 hours? What the fuck?
Feminine personality structure, because I'm pretty high in negative emotion and I'm pretty high in agreeableness. And that's the typical feminine structure, and that's an interesting discussion to have too. Because
that's not what he said though. Why you think people not realize you are lying? My favorite part about Jordan Peterson fan base, the Jordan Peterson fan base, is that like they have the exact same defenses. Like their brain has stayed in stasis since 2016 where Jordan Peterson was popping off, and their arguments are still exactly the same. It's like I can hear Jordan Peterson quite literally be like, I don't like trans people. I don't like them. I think they're weird. And I'd be like, yo, that's transphobic. And someone would be like, oh, actually, you're not understanding what he's saying. You don't get it. You don't understand. You need like 7,000 hours of Jordan Peterson's lectures to understand that he's actually still transphobic. It's just, you also are transphobic. And you just don't want to fucking admit that. Okay, it just makes you feel bad. If he wasn't transphobic, would you agree with his other points more? No, because he is an old man who has an incredibly reactionary worldview. I don't agree with like 90% of what he says. The only thing I agree with is like the fucking self-help shit, which is not even his. That's like plagiarized from every other self-help book, okay?
What do you think is happening with trans people then?
Well, there's a lot of different kinds of trans people.
Okay, first trans men, or excuse me, trans women, men to female.
Well, then I would say it depends on what period.
Dude, it is still kind of funny. Like, obviously, transphobia is not funny, but transphobic people trying to, like, talk about trans people in a way where, like, they can't immediately be fucking transphobic because they have to be descriptive is hilarious to watch, because he's like, he wants to be transphobic, but he can't be transphobic yet. You know what I mean? Because like he has to be descriptive, which is inherently the reason why people are like, it doesn't even make fucking like logistical sense to be transphobic. You know what I mean? Like you can't simultaneously be transphobic and also and logically contextualize transphobia at the same time. So you have to like first establish the conversation in a non-transphobic way so that you can turn around and be transphobic. Does that make sense? Okay.
Period of time you're asking that question about. Right now, if you look at teenagers, for example, who want to switch genders, 95% of them are unbearably confused. That's what's causing that. And I think there's other reasons too. I think this is a conjecture. When the trans teenagers came after me when I opposed Bill C-16 in Canada on compelled speech grounds, I spent quite a bit of time watching them. And I already kind of knew about that fluid identity crowd. So when I was at Harvard, piercing and tattooing started to become a cultural rage. And I was interested in, well, who's doing this? Because I knew it was a practice that was limited to criminal subtypes and your life. And if you were a prisoner, same thing. But then all of a sudden it started to make its inroads into the popular culture. So we studied a group of early adopters of tattooing and piercing from the perspective of personality. Like, who are these people? And they were all highly creative people. Well, and creativity is a trait. And all people who aren't creative, that's wrong. In fact, most people aren't creative at all. And I can explain that later, but they're not. We developed a scale called the Creative Achievement Questionnaire, which assesses lifetime contribution to 13 different creative domains. And that your scores would range from 0, I have no training or talent in this area, to, I think it was 8.
Yeah. I mean, listen, Jordan Peterson, once again, just absolutely fucking nailing it, dude. That's why I always love asking, sexless nerds what it's like to be with women and like how to best conduct myself around women. And that's why I like to ask Jordan Peterson what the trans experience is like. A man who has never been around trans people, only in like a debate has he ever been around trans people, and a man who has never even seen trans people as like fully developed human beings. That's precisely why it's hilarious when he says like, trans people are actually incredibly creative with their gender identity, and that's just what they're doing. They're being creative. It's like, bro, have you met 0 like trans people in the fucking STEM field? Okay. I'm sorry to all my fucking, trans STEM lords, but some of you don't have an ounce of creativity in your fucking body. Okay. You don't have a single fucking creative bone. It's just the truth. Okay. It's ridiculous that this dumbass is like, oh, trans people are all so creative. It's like, he literally just thinks like trans people are the meme, like the blue-haired SJW meme.
8. I'm an internationally recognized expert.
Losing their shit.
Area. Right. And so 70% of people, if you sum their scores across all 13 domains, scored 0. And I ask audiences like, how many portraits have you painted? 0. How many songs have you composed? 0. How many plays have you written? 0. How many recipes have you invented?
Let me stop you.
So the tattooed types are high. They were high in creativity.
Okay.
And a lot of these people who are fluid in their identity are actually high in trait openness. And they do have fluid identities. And some of them are feminine men and masculine women. So, yeah. But that doesn't mean that surgery is the cure.
I love that. It's like trans women are just they're femboys that went to fem. That's what it is. Yeah, that's how this works. A good take from Jordan. I mean, he is such a fucking boring old turf, dude. This is like straight up. I mean, he's not even a radical feminist, but like this is the exact same idea that rad femmes have, where they're like, why can't women be fucking butch anymore? Like women can't be butch lesbians anymore. It's like they all have to be trans men. It's like there's an entirely there are still fucking butch lesbians, okay? And 2, it's like a totally separate thing. It's a totally separate thing.
For that it does not mean that. Not at all.
Well, what do you think it means when someone is so attracted to the idea that they were born in the wrong body? It means so much. They're so compelled that they're willing to go through surgery to change.
God, it means all sorts of things. I knew a kid in Toronto who was on the autistic spectrum, and a lot of the people who are manifesting serious issues with gender identity are on the autistic spectrum.
This is like Abigail Schreier's work and rapid onset gender.
We watched this yesterday. It's crazy. Okay, what have we established so far? Trans people do not exist. They're just, incredibly femme men, okay? They're femboys and they're masked girls. Okay, that's just how it is. And also, everyone's autistic.
Dysphoria amongst women.
Yeah, well, that's a different thing, the rapid onset. That's more like, so part of the reason I objected to Bill since I was 16 to begin with was because I knew full well as a clinician that as soon as we messed with fundamental sex categories and changed the terminology, we would fatally confuse thousands of young girls. I knew that because I knew the literature on psychological contagion. And it stretches back like 500 years.
And now we get to the best part, okay? The best part is when he's like, I, Jordan Peterson, have already dropped 2 fucking knowledge bombs in the span of 3 minutes where I said, transness does not exist. You're either a femboy or a butch girl, and it's because you're really creative, and that creativity is seeped into your gender identity, and also you're autistic. Now he's going to turn this around and be like, it's just like, contagion. Like when women started going into the workplace, I'm now going to be also misogynistic on top of my transphobia.
Here's that literature, 300 years. It's all outlined in a book by Henri Ellenberger called History of, what's the name of the book? History of Psychoanalytic Ideas. It doesn't matter. It's Henri Ellenberger, and it's his main work if you want to look it up. And so psychological contagions are very common. And so one of them, for example, was the satanic ritual abuse accusations that emerged in daycares in the 1980s. And that was a consequence of women going into the workforce en masse, leaving their children with strangers and starting to have pathological fantasies about it, especially if they were borderline schizophrenic. And those fantasies propagated into the population.
So what does this have to do with creativity?
I love that take. It's such a good take, dude. Yeah, I did pre-watch it. I watched it yesterday. It's like it wasn't enough that he was being transphobic. Then he was like, it's also the women that went into the workplace that created the satanic panic. It's awesome. That is just like, you can't make a combo like that, okay? He literally did a combination. He's like a fighting games community champion, okay? He just like added on additional seasoning to his transphobic takes in a way that was like unnecessary, but he wanted to get the style points out, you know? Respect.
You were talking about creativity in people that are...
Well, okay, so you see people with blue hair, the blue-haired crowd. Well, they're the same people that were doing tattooing and piercing, and they often are literally the same people because they have piercings. It's like, well, they have mutable identities. They're not stable in their identities. They're creative.
Wait, I'm about to do something here, and this is completely unrelated to the JP stuff. Hold on 1 second. Is it better, or did it fuck it up more? Is it worse? And now I'm looking at the screen.
And the answer to this is, in part, we let creative people play multiple games on the fringe, and some of them are radically successful, and then we copy them.
So you think
this is your brain on too much like anti-materialist thought, okay? You know, the creatives are actually changing culture, they're shaping culture, and trans people are creative, which we already established, okay? That's a premise that we already established. They're artistic and autistic, okay? And they are incredibly creative, too creative sometimes, and that's why they have invented new gender identities, which is hilarious because Jordan Peterson is transracial. Technically, when he talks about his indigenous background, which does not exist. Many white people do this, right? And if he truly was indigenous, okay, if he actually was a member of truly a member of the First Nation tribe that he claims to be a part of, then he would recognize that like trans culture, if that was a cultural thing, is not new. The idea that it's like, oh, this is a new thing that trans people are inventing. Well, indigenous people kind of did that for a long time. How do you not know that? You know, there's a concept called a two-spirit, which is quite literally what he is referencing, okay? So even as a fake native, he should know this, but he doesn't. Like this idea that like transness as a concept is new and made up completely avoids centuries of trans literature, trans people, depictions of transness in media, and in all the way down to like fucking tribes, okay, that are completely devoid of Western culture. So again, so idiotic. LMFAO trans literature. I mean, yeah, okay. So there have of course been a lot of fucking trans people that have existed It's like gay people that have also existed. Shocking. It's more so that like we are now recognizing that these people exist. But there was a lot of research conducted on this subject matter leading up to World War II, where the Nazis actually burned the first books they ever burned were books on trans people, trans existence, and medical journals on trans people. So ironic that Jordan Peterson once again is one benefiting from the lack of knowledge on trans existence to launch his incorrect arguments about trans people, and he's also talking about free speech, which he's an advocate for free speech, but like the reason why he doesn't know a lot about trans people is because Nazis burned the books.
That a lot of what's going on with people that want to change their gender identity is creativity?
No, I don't think so.
So
even Joe Rogan is like, that sounds kind of crazy.
I know so.
You know so.
Yeah, but that's not all of it, but that's definitely part of it.
But there are for sure a lot of people that transition, and there has been work on this that shows that if they didn't transition, they wanted to transition at one point in time, and then they eventually wound up becoming gay men.
Yeah,
This
that's
is
definitely
males
the case.
to females,
yeah, well, it's
right?
confusing. Look, I mean, I also think, by the way, that part of what we're seeing in late adolescence with this insistence on
How did he take a real study conducted on trans people greatly improving their living conditions as a consequence of social acceptability, and many studies that have been conducted about transition or gender confirmation that is incredibly helpful, and turn it into something that is incredibly transphobic? Again, he's saying trans women or gay men is like, how do you do that? How do you take actual empirical evidence that shows that gender confirmation surgery is very helpful, and even beyond gender confirmation, what's even more important than gender confirmation surgery is that acceptance, trans acceptance in the immediate friends and family and social circles is greatly diminishes the likelihood of suicidality, is really fucking interesting.
On the primacy of felt identity is the reemergence of suppressed fantasy play that should have taken place at between, say, 3 and 5. That's been suppressed by the imposition of technological artifacts like television and phones, and by the absence of free play among children who are hyper-supervised.
So the fantasy play is imperative to develop your identity by trying out a bunch of different patterns of behavior
Yes, exactly.
and ways to be.
Yes, so when my son was about...
I mean, how is it any different than fucking Ross Douthat or whatever, any kind of fucking reactionary psycho basically saying phones are forcibly feminizing us? You know what I mean? In the 90s version of that, quite literally, is, all this technology is making us gay. That's it. That's what this is. It's just all of that is so stupid. And also it's bad, by the way. I keep forgetting to add that phones are forcibly feminizing us, and that's bad. And also phones are forcibly making us gay, and that's bad. It's who cares if fucking people are gay or trans? Even if people were turning, which is not a real concept. But let's say it was. And this is the other part that I always have a hard time with. If being a homosexual was a choice, or being trans was a choice, why the fuck are they, which it's not, and I have to be clear on this, it certainly is not, okay? Why the fuck is that somehow bad? Why is that bad? It's not true, it's not a choice, but even if it was, why is that bad?
2, his sister was about 3 and had a little gaggle of friends, and they used to dress him up like a fairy princess. And this didn't happen for years. It happened for a couple of weeks, and he was playing along. And I went down there, and I'm a Northern Albertan, and so the gender roles there were fairly finely defined. And I was watching this, I thought,
what the hell are you doing? I'll beat the shit out of you, son. You're a Northern Albertan. Now go fuck this fracking juice that I made right now. Go drink that fracking cum immediately, bucko.
Is it really a good thing that he's
fracking juice up?
Got wings on, a little fairy hat and a wand and a dress? Is that okay? And I talked to Tammy about it. I said, the girls are dressing Julian up like a princess. And it kind of, I have qualms about it, but I'm not sure what to do, because he was having a good time and he was playing with the girls. And
what qualms would you possibly have about that? Because from my personal experience of having daughters,
yeah,
they think it's funny to put me in a dress.
It is funny.
Yeah. Well, yeah. There was a dress that my wife was throwing out, and my daughters made me put it on. They forced me to, and they took pictures of me.
Yeah, I bet
they thought it was hilarious.
Yeah. My daughter decorated me up like a woman one day in her makeup class.
Right. So what's wrong with that? Nothing, right?
Well, that's
just fun.
No. well, that's it. That's what I
Right.
concluded. I thought, well,
But why would you worry about anything else other than it being fun?
probably because why was I worried about it?
Why
put me in
were
a
you
dress.
worried about it? What made you worry about it? One of my favorite types of transphobia and homophobia is when they will turn around and be like, well, it's because society is really mean and rough to those who are trans. And that's why, it's a choice. And also, that's why I tell them not to choose to be trans. And it's like, well, is society mean and rough to trans people, like by design? Or have you turned it into that and refused to fucking, offer any restitution or stop doing that?
It is funny.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
there was a dress that my wife was throwing out, and my daughters made me put it on. They
Yeah.
forced me to, and they took pictures of me.
Yeah, I bet
they thought it
that
was hilarious.
Yeah. My daughter decorated me up like a woman one day in her makeup class. And
Right.
there's a
So what's
favorite-
wrong with that? Nothing, right?
Well, that's
just fun.
No, well, that's it. That's what I
Right.
concluded. I thought, well,
But why would you worry about anything else other than it being fun?
probably because why was I worried about it? I suppose because I hoped that his pathway towards adulthood would be,
Normal?
yeah, sure.
Normal biological male progression to
Yeah. And so I saw
marriage
this
and
playing,
children,
but then I
yeah.
thought, I only had qualms for like about 2 hours. I went and thought about it. I thought, okay, what's going on here? Well, he's playing with the girls. Okay, should he play with girls? Yes. Definitely. He should play with girls. Absolutely. Adult males should play with women. Like, we should be able to play with people.
What the fuck? Yo, he's going Joker mode, dude. It's crazy. He's going full-blown Joker mode here. Look at this. Look at his face.
Okay, should he play with girls? Yes. Definitely.
Definitely.
He should play with girls. Absolutely.
Definitely.
Adult males should play with women. Like, we should be able to play with people of the opposite sex. Like, so he's learning to play with the girls. Good. Is he enjoying it? Yes. Are they bullying him? No. Are the girls enjoying it? Yes. That's all good. Okay, so what does it mean he's playing at being a girl? Oh, he's trying to understand what it means to be a girl. Well, how do you understand that when you're 3 or maybe when you're 50? You play at it, which means you allow that pattern of being to inhabit you and you experiment with it. Now, a lot of older transgender types, the late onset types, they're playing. They just don't know it. Now, there are often people who have a kind of a rigid identity, and part of their escape from that rigid identity is to develop some of the characteristics that are typical of the opposite sex. They need it.
What is the term? There is a term for a man who derives a lot of sexual pleasure. He's heterosexual, but he
I
derives
think it's
sexual.
autogynephilia.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, but I think the sexual.
Fully explain that.
Yeah,
because
well, I don't
What?
think it does. I think the reason they derive, because the question is, why do they derive sexual pleasure?
Finish the sentence. You're not finishing the sentence. Like, explain what we're saying.
Yeah, well, they derive sexual pleasure. They would get turned on by seeing themselves in the clothes of women,
Yes.
or feeling it.
Yes.
But I think the sexual instinct is directing them towards personality expansion. I look at it.
Dude, if being trans had something to do with your fucking sexuality, then all trans people would have the same sexual proclivities when they don't. So what the fuck? This is why when two transphobic people talk about trans people, it's just like so much of the conversation is missing because they just like hyper focus on one type of trans person, okay? It's just so stupid. It's like you forget that like, you know, there are so many different kinds of trans people. Like you're just hyper focusing on one thing and thinking that you're making a good argument against one fucking thing. It's so stupid.
In Jungian terms. So part of the process of personality expansion in the deep psychoanalytic sense is first you're a persona, or first you're nothing. Then you develop a persona, which is a way of presenting yourself in a socially acceptable way to the world. And maybe you confuse yourself with your persona. Now, you've had conversations with people on your podcast who are stiff and you can't get a dynamic conversation going. And it's because they're acting out their persona. You're not really talking to them. You're talking to an act that they've constructed. It's a puppet. An act that they've constructed to make themselves socially acceptable to the world.
And sometimes it's just anxiety.
Yeah, sure. It can be anxiety too. But then often under anxious conditions, people will revert to their persona because it's a well-rehearsed set of routines and that they know is socially acceptable.
Hasan doesn't respond to this, so I will. Okay, Jordan, you say trans people are playing, that they are creating a persona because they couldn't when they were young or something. But then go on to say all people develop a persona that is quote, socially acceptable. Why on earth would trans people do this to become socially accepted? Trans people know damn well they aren't socially accepted, largely because of people like you and the transphobia you create. Trans people don't put on a persona for other people. They do whatever they choose to do to help manage their gender dysphoria. After Joe and JP theorize on why some men beat women or something, JP then talks about the movie Joker, and he drops this weird statement closing the trans discussion.
Every single thing he does in the entire movie is a dance. Like, he's conscious of every single movement he makes. Every turn of his head is conscious. It's dance-like, and you can't take your eyes off it. And a lot of stellar performers had that ability to integrate, male performers had that ability to integrate that feminine grace into their masculine character. You saw that with Bowie, David Bowie. You saw it with Mick Jagger. They're good examples. A lot of those 70s glam rockers were gender benders, long hair, a lot of flashy outfits, and they did show, and they weren't exactly androgynous. That's not the right way to think about it. Is they manifested a higher order integration of masculine and feminine, and that made them charismatic. Because
that's Prince. He's the best
Prince,
example.
Sure. And so that's high order integration. And I would say that part of the compulsion between adult onset transsexuality of the autogynephilic type is a consequence of the sexual instinct manifesting itself as a guide to the integration of personality across the sex divide.
Yeah. Got it. Thanks, Jordan, makes a lot of fucking sense. Joe then goes on to quote Douglas Murray, who said that when civilizations collapse, like the Romans, they become obsessed with gender. Then Jordan somehow loops it back to the Bible being the foundation of all culture. It's stupid. I hate this man and I hated editing this, listening to this fucking brain rot. But thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Have a good evening, afternoon, pre-noon, no matter where you are in the world. Also, trans women are women.